we get to see the future. But make no mistake, ludicrous as it looks, insane as Elon Musk seems, corrupt as the Texas Attorney General is, this Indict Media Matters story is the future. It is practice. Musk, in fact, is the stand-in for the role ultimately to be played by Dementia J. Trump. Not merely politicizing, but fully privatizing criminal prosecution in this country. This is what the Republicans want. This is why they have embraced fascism. This is why they have sold the fragments of souls they have to Trump. This is why they spent millions to buy Attorney General Paxton's acquittal when he was impeached by his own party in Texas. This is the future. A theocracy with theocratic courts, or a corporate state with corporate courts, or whatever brand of authoritarianism they want with any brand of authoritarian courts they want. Happy Thanksgiving. Could be worse, could be next year. We could all already be packing to move if the borders are still open. I know you regret that I was ever taught the word stochastic, but here it is again. Elon Musk, a large and not very well-adjusted child with some developmental problems that have lately been exacerbated by something, somebody suggested it was Ozempic, buys an almost non-denominational social media site, lets his inner fascist out, swings the site wildly to the right, and then swings it past mere conservatism or repression into outright religious and racial hatred and incitement. And he gets caught. His business genius has been exposed as exploitative luck. He has broken a successful business model. He has let his hatreds and prejudices leak out. Just yesterday, somebody tweeted a photo of Musk standing in front of an American flag, swinging a sword. He replied to it, "There is a large graveyard filled with my enemies. I do not wish to add to it, but will if given no choice." I can't imagine how Twitter lost half its value in his year owning it with public relations like that. And now he is caught endorsing anti-Semitism, platforming anti-Semitism, mainstreaming anti-Semitism, and caught by investigative journalists getting major corporations larger than his to pay him to be juxtaposed alongside the Nazis. The corporations read that investigation. The corporations did their own investigations. The corporations bailed out, and Musk must blame someone. Musk blamed the journalists. Media Matters claimed they were guilty of fraud, even though while making the claim, he in fact confessed that Twitter X did place mainstream ads next to anti-Semitic content. Then the leader of the Trump undead, Stephen Miller, replied, "Fraud is both a civil and criminal violation. There are 24 plus conservative attorneys general." And that, here's the word again, that was the stochastic call. It echoed, and within 2.5 hours, the conservative attorney general of Missouri wrote, "My team is looking into this matter." Interestingly, his team evidently noticed there was no crime, no fraud, nothing but a whiny, blubbering man boy needing a scapegoat, because the next day, that attorney general and his team stopped looking into this matter. But the one from Texas, Ken Paxton, now wholly owned by the forces that run the state's lieutenant governor, must do whatever those forces want, and what they want is anything that puts a finger on the political scale, anything that favors the Republicans, even though their demographic is dying out. And this man Paxton is backed by oil billionaires named Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilks, and Tim Dunn is linked to Brad Parscale, and Brad Parscale is back working on Trump's 2024 campaign. It's stochastic prosecution. Musk, new right-wing hero and owner of a useful platform for spreading the vilest filth most quickly, complains. Stephen Miller, truly one of the worst human beings on the planet, lights the bat signal. Ken Paxton, who has to do stuff like this or the billionaires will stop protecting him, promises to jail reporters for telling the truth. It isn't Musk prosecuting Media Matters. It isn't Stephen Miller. It's Paxton. If Paxton gets anywhere, right now the leading evidence of a violation of the Texas Deceptive Trade Practices Act is Musk's allegation that because when Media Matters tested the advertising algorithm, it followed only 30 accounts and managed to generate 14 times more ads per hour than an average user would see. If Paxton gets anywhere with that, other attorneys general will follow. And even if all of them get laughed out of court, Media Matters is now spending millions to defend itself in how many different states? The template is being sanded down and polished as we watch. This is the future. This is practice for the bastards. Like January 6th was practice for the bastards. Just like the entirety of Trump's time in the White House was practice for the bastards. Trump doesn't have to repeal the First Amendment to put Kristen Welker in jail, or in theory, to put you in jail if you've ever tweeted or written anything online that he doesn't like, or in theory, me in jail. Hell, I could easily be first. Trump doesn't have to get Congress to make a law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. He just drops the prosecution down to a state. And the next thing you know, Texas or Florida or Missouri or Mississippi becomes a veritable journalistic speed trap. Is the Washington Post based in Mississippi? No. Can you buy it there? Hell, I don't know where to buy it anymore in New York City. Can you read it online or its posts on Twitter while you are physically in Mississippi? Ball game. Trump may or may not understand any of this. He is the definition of the old joke about how nobody wants to hear about the labor pains, they just want to see the baby. How many times, though, has he called the press the enemy of the people? He hands Stephen Miller an article in the New York Times or something from the Gateway Pundit shaming Jim Acosta or MSNBC, or worse yet, somebody who can help him calls up and says, Mr. President, the Bucks County Beacon here in Pennsylvania just incommoded me. And Trump says, tell Paxton, jail Acosta, jail the Bucks County Beacon. And Miller says, yes, master, and crawls back to his cave. And if Paxton won't prosecute, maybe Bailey in Missouri will, and 99% of the public won't even see Trump's grubby fingerprints on any of it. Or Miller's, if he has fingerprints. And even if it doesn't get that far, even if this thing right now does not become a Trump dictatorship and we don't privatize and politicize prosecution and state attorneys general don't constantly refresh social media waiting for their opportunity to spring into action for Trump like so many flying monkeys waiting for the wicked witch to point out which direction, the chilling effect is already there. I have said this again and again. Every media corporation in this country has already had this meeting. What do we do if Trump regains power? Not what do we do to protect our ability to cover the news, but what do we do to protect our ability to make profits for our stockholders and salaries for ourselves? We have our phony baloney jobs to worry about, gentlemen. We never did find out what that internal NBC investigation of the Meet the Press Trump interview found out about a rumored deal to keep virtually all fact-checking to an obscure corner of the website. But even if it's just all coincidence there, you think people aren't scared? And even if somehow they aren't scared, you think they aren't blanching at the thought of all the work involved in fending off another 4 years or 12 of Trump? These are people with mortgages and jobs in an industry already being shrunk by market forces. The head of the news division in the movie Network, played by William Holden, tells the acting president of the network, you want me out of here, you're going to have to drag me out kicking and screaming, and the whole news division kicking and screaming with me. And the acting president, played by Robert Duvall, answers calmly, you think they're going to quit their jobs for you? Not in this recession, buddy. It's like everybody asking why Musk's stooge Linda Yaccarino hasn't yet quit her job as Musk's stooge. Or why her family hasn't staged an intervention. Well, he's paying Linda Yaccarino $6 million a year. Who is the last media person to walk out on a job paying that much or more on principle? I mean, besides me. I'll hang up and listen. And one more self-referential thing the future reminds us of, the turnover in political coverage, newspapers, online, television, whatever. It's always been about 5 years. And I don't just mean the fact that the White House correspondents get out as fast as they can. I mean that about 75% of the people in political journalism in this country 5 years ago no longer are in political journalism. I started on MSNBC on October 1st, 1997. In March 1998, April, I can't remember, I was the featured guest of the Washington Post at the front table at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Then I ran screaming back into sports in December 1998, and a year after that, I was in the gift shop at a hotel in St. Louis, and the former Wyoming Senator Alan Simpson walks in and sees me and gives me a big hug and says, "Congratulations on escaping. Wait here a minute." And then he leaves, goes back into the lobby, and he returns to the gift shop, and he's got his wife with him now, and he says to her, "You see this guy, honey? This is Keith. This is the one I was telling you about. He got out of politics after just 1 year. It's taken me 40. 2 years later, I went back into politics at MSNBC, and nobody, literally nobody, who was at that Washington Post table with me just 4 years earlier was still at the Washington Post. And no, I don't think it was me. Think of the TV people and even most of the print people who were on Trump's campaign in 2016 or who were White House correspondents. How many of them still have that job? How many of them will see getting that job in the future as a great assignment and a great stepping stone to something bigger and less consuming? If you can get prosecuted by proxy, prosecuted for doing your job well, prosecuted by Trump for telling the truth, even something as stupidly open and shut as truth about Musk's platforming of anti-Semitism, why are you going to aspire to do that job? If somehow I need to emphasize to you that we cannot let Trump back into the White House, you are probably listening to the wrong podcast or you are taking notes for Ken Paxton. But it is increasingly obvious to me that they are so confident they will get there that, as they used to say of football coaches, they have already scripted all the plays for the entire first half because they are letting us see the future. From Project 2025 and the consortium of right-wing nut jobs Trump will call upon to punish anybody they want to punish, to Agenda 47 to make up crimes to prosecute everybody from Bill Barr to Barack Obama, to Schedule F to purge the civil service of anybody not personally loyal to Trump. And now this, the privatized prosecution double play, Musk to Miller to Paxton. And we got another glimpse of the 2025 that you might have seen in the bad portions of Back to the Future Part 2 or It's a Wonderful Life. The reference earlier to Trump wanting somebody to prosecute the Bucks County Beacon was not gratuitous. It is the small investigative operation in Pennsylvania doing great and dangerous work. And you can't convince me that their work did not at least contribute to a small but meaningful victory earlier this month. A MAGA millionaire named Paul Martino poured untold money into the Central Bucks School District School Board race. They ran 5 humanoid book banners and librarian prosecutors, and they lost all 5 seats to Democrats. Swept out roughly 16,000 total votes to 12,000. So what happens next? The Bucks County Beacon reports that the Pennsylvania Court of Common Pleas has now received no fewer than 13 different petitions claiming Title 25 of the State Elections Code, Statute 3261, was violated and the ballot boxes were improperly opened, and thus the election has to be thrown out. The 13 different petitions are identical. The Trumpists are so confident that they are tipping their hands and they are running the Stop the Steal playbook again in a county that is exactly 622 square miles and whose largest community has 53,000 residents and the second largest has 10,000. And this is about a school board. And if you see the QAnon shaman walking around one of those communities, please alert the authorities. So ultimately, how do we stop this? Oh, by the way, CNBC reports that the Mercers are reconsidering. The Mercers are the MAGA hedge fund millionaire family who apparently got nauseated by Trump in 2018 and have not given money to him since, and sources close to them think they may have changed their minds, such as they are, and sworn new fealty to Trump. And their family nonprofit foundation, that is the polite euphemism for a post-Citizens United political slush fund, their little Mercer family nonprofit has $88 million just sitting in it, waiting to be spent in politics. How do you defeat this? Well, there is one way, and it starts by recognizing the through line that connects Musk and Trump and Paxton and the Mercers and faint-hearted media executives and Yacarino and Bucks freaking County and our little preview of the future these last 2 days. Some of them are doing it for wackadoodle religious reasons. Some of them are doing it to stop the pounding in their addled brains like Musk and Trump. Some of them are doing it for the power trip, but all of them are at least also doing it for one other reason. There's money in it for them. Now, we can't boycott all of them. The United States of America cannot even drop Elon Musk as a contractor. His communications devices he sells us are more secure than the ones we make. We can't legislate our way out of government by highest bidder. We cannot appeal to people's knowledge of the nation's history of freedom, nor their knowledge that it all could be at risk because we stopped teaching these things 30 years ago. Nope. We are going to have to outbribe them. We have to find the Democratic Mercers. We have to find the Democratic billionaires, and they have to flood the market and support not just Media Matters, but create 100 Media Matters. And they have to literally underwrite liberal media, the way conservative billionaires keep fascist media from going bankrupt. And they have to play the dirtier game, and they have to buy legislatures, and they have to buy judges. And if the other side is stretching democracy to destroy democracy, they and we have to stretch democracy to save democracy. Hit them with your wallets, boys. Or this nightmare Trump and the Trumpists are showing us is not the future, it's the present. Also of interest here, 60 years since the assassination of President Kennedy. And not only is that day etched in the memories of those of us who were alive then, even those of us like me who were little kids, but this day in 1963 was ground zero for the world we live in now. Conspiracy theory America. But mostly, it was just the day so many of us realized something was terribly, terribly wrong. Because the grown-ups were crying. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Postscripts to the news. Some headlines, some updates, some snark, some predictions. Dateline New York City, this is just a hunch based on the last couple weeks and about 57 years of knowing who the mayor of New York is. I go all the way back to John Lindsay. I don't think the current mayor is going to finish his term. The New York independent news site The City reports there is now another new business that got fast-tracked by the mayor's office, and it's part of the federal investigation into his fundraising. And the problem here is the business is a sushi restaurant next to Grand Central, and it got cleared to open in a record 3 months, and it's co-owned by S.L. Green, the developers who just happen to have been one of Mayor Eric Adams' top campaign contributors. Bad enough? Yes. But match it up with this. The mayor has launched a legal defense fund and was asked about it by the local New York TV news outlet New York One, which then got him saying and swaying this on tape.
Oh, wait, hold on. Did you see? Do you see all these people? You see all these people? Hold on. You see all these people love me?
They do.
Some people love me as man, so they have the right to do whatever they want when they love their man.
So you expect them to give their legal defense?
I just expect people who love me and love the work I'm doing, they have a right to do whatever they want. That's what America's about. People have the right to do what they want.
Do you expect the case to drag out? That's why you want
Yeah, Mayor Adams sounds fine. No problems at all. He's just, what's the right word? Sailing, huh? Dateline Trenton, New Jersey. No, everything's also fine with Senator Bob Menendez's legal defense. You will recall that the senator was accused of, among other things, accepting, quote, gifts, unquote, from people connected to the government of Turkey in the form of gold bars. Now, I've never actually been a criminal defendant, but I was in a lawsuit once with a lot of money on the table, and the advice that my lawyers gave me then was, lay low. Don't draw attention to the case. Don't draw attention to yourself. Just, when you have the option, keep it small rather than big. Be circumspect. The Daily Beast reports that Senator Menendez has hired a new lawyer, Robert Luskin, to defend him in the gold bars case, and that Mr. Luskin's nickname is, this is not a joke, Mr. Luskin's nickname is Gold Bars Luskin, because he once got paid with gold bars by a client. Senator, there wasn't some lawyer from Turkey you could have hired instead? Thank you, Nancy Faust. Still ahead of us on Countdown. Do you remember the assassination of President Kennedy? Do you remember where you were when it happened? Not if you ain't 60, meat, or more realistically, if you ain't 64 or 65. Well, I'm 64 or 65, and I sure remember it. And now, I also recognize it as ground zero of the nightmare we live today, in which the more insane a conspiracy theory is, the easier it is to sell it to the rubes and the goobers. Think about this. One of the biggest conspiracy theories of 2021 and 2022, though it's calmed down a little since, was that President Kennedy was not actually dead. That's next in Things I Promised Not to Tell. First time for the daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's worst persons in the world. Worse? Coincidental? Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana. He went on Fox Business News and he did a racism and a sexism. Says the Democrats have decided to dump Vice President Harris and adds, quote, when her IQ gets to 75, she should sell. I will note that even though he looks like a 21st century version of Mr. Heaney from Green Acres only after his face had melted, Senator Kennedy went to Oxford. I will also note that when he tried to say, when her IQ gets to 75, she should sell, he was unable to successfully pronounce the word should. a mirror, sir. Buy a mirror. Worser, whoever he is on Twitter, he or it is one bad dude, Dorf7325657. He's boasting he got reposted by Trump on Trump's social media site, so I guess that means he's not a robot, he's a mammal of some sort. To me, this is the Trump cult mentality in one meme. This was a response on Twitter to Trump's website suing 20 media outlets for bad coverage. Hey, why does that sound so familiar? Paging Ken Paxton. And there is a meme with the picture of the dejected Trump walking back in the darkness with one of them stupid hats in his hand with his tie untied and strung around his neck. It's like 43 feet long, and he looks like a piece of crap. I mean, more than usual. And the tweeter writes above this picture, "This man will not give up ever." But the meme reads, "This man gave it all up." And one bad dude never noticed. "This man will not give up ever. This man gave it all up." The Trump fan in a nutshell. But our winner, the worst. I often describe Nikki Haley as one of the dumbest people I have ever encountered. I realize she might be the last hope of those who still think Trump will somehow be derailed by the GOP. I'm sorry to say, if she's the last hope, there is no hope. She's in Hooksett, New Hampshire, God help her, and she spies at a little rally a 9-year-old girl named Hannah in the crowd wearing a Nikki Haley campaign hat. And Nikki Haley looks at this and she can't leave well enough alone. She just can't take the win.
Hi, sweet girl. How are you? I love your hat.
Thank you. Let it hear guys give it to me for free.
9-year-old Hannah has a better chance of derailing Trump than Nikki never work with animals or children Haley, today's worst person in the world! Nice hat! To the number one story on the countdown and things I promised not to tell, and it is now 60 years since the assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And there are 1,000 consequences we could not have foreseen that day that have all come true. And maybe of most relevance right now, that horror was the starting point of the modern American society obsessed with conspiracy theories. We have always had conspiracy theories. Ask the Masons or Jewish people or circus performers. But the bungling of the Kennedy investigation, the privatizing of the film evidence, the failure to ever address the obvious questions, fostered a collective doubt in this country that seems like it doubled every year from 1963 into the 90s, I guess. And then as people who really remembered President Kennedy began to die off, the conspiracy cloud did not die off. It lingered. And it split up and fragmented, and it attached itself to almost anything, almost everything that somebody did not want to believe was true. 9/11, climate change, elections, and we know where it has gone since then. It has overtaken this country and destroyed our collective ability to have a nation in which we have one set of just basic facts. And on climate change, it will kill us. Parts of the globe, parts of America will become uninhabitable, and there will be politicians and influencers telling us, no, that hasn't happened. And most people will realize that climate change is true only in the last year of their life, maybe the last minute. In any event, the Kennedy assassination has become so much more than, as if anybody could have foreseen this statement ever being uttered, more than just a presidential assassination. It was, in many ways, an assassination of a culture. We really did used to have a shared set of facts. And I speak on this as one of the youngest people you know who has a distinct memory of the day JFK was killed. Understand how old this memory actually is. Me telling it to you now is the equivalent of somebody on that day, on November 22nd, 1963, telling me about his own childhood memories of the election of 1904. Or somebody in, say, 1924, 1925, going on about the personal memories of the Civil War, or more appropriately for this, their memories of the day Lincoln was shot. On November 22nd, 1963, I was 2 months and 5 days shy of my 5th birthday. I was in kindergarten, and we finished every Friday around noon, and I was already home and in my room. And the reason I can see it so distinctly is that just weeks before, my folks had bought a new television. Black and white, of course, crystal clear picture, or so we thought, and it was the first new one they had bought in 8 years. And they took the old television, a gigantic thing that required its own rolling stand and had a speaker the size and the tan color of a hi-fi record player and had the giant rabbit ear antennas that you hear about in satires these days. And they rolled that thing into my room and set it up, speaking of rabbits, under my giant Bugs Bunny wall clock with the ears pointing to all the characters in the cartoons. I was in my room watching cartoons, luxuriating in my newfound television ownership. No other kid I knew had their own TV. And my mother was out in our tiny living room in our tiny house in Hastings-on-Hudson, New York, when I heard her shout. And not long after I heard the phone ring. It was in the kitchen, the phone, and it had a cord so long that it could stretch into the living room. And it was quickly apparent that if my mother was not crying, she seemed about to. I came out and stood next to her, and she said, "Your father wants you to go in the room and close the door and watch the cartoons. He will be home soon." This made no sense. I was a kid. I was not an idiot. I was still aware of time. It was the middle of the afternoon, and Dad would not be home on the train from New York before 6. At least he wasn't supposed to be. But I went back into my room. I did not fully close the door because I was something of a sneak. And soon I heard my mother tell my father to be careful and hurry back home. The next thing I heard was her back in the kitchen dialing the phone, and these were the days of the rotary phones, where if you had to dial the number 9, it took several seconds to move the rotary dial clockwise, and even longer for it to rebound to the starting point counterclockwise. And each time you did this, it made so much noise, it sounded like somebody trying to start the electric lawnmower, or maybe a prop plane. Given enough quiet on the street, you could hear it from outside. Well, that noise gave me cover to sneak back into the hallway about halfway between my room and the living room, and I heard my mother say, "My God, Barbara, did you see? Kennedy's been shot. What's going to happen next?" It was her sister-in-law, my Uncle Bill's wife, Barbara. Barbara and Bill lived in Connecticut at that time. This was a long-distance call. I am not sure if they got off the phone before my dad got home more than an hour later. I am confident my mother told Aunt Barbara that she heard Walter Cronkite say 3 men shot Kennedy, and she would insist that for the rest of her life. Now I went back to my room and started changing the channel, another feat of strength in 1963. You had to literally change the dial. I settled on Channel 2, and yes, at age 4 I occasionally watched the news. I certainly had an idea who the president was and who John F. Kennedy was, and although it is lodged in my memory that 59 years ago today, I was not sure that they were one and the same person. But what I could tell was that either Kennedy or the president or both of them, or they were the same person, had been shot in some place called Dallas. I didn't know what the president did per se, but I had figured out a lot earlier, mostly because of the coverage of John Glenn and the other early astronauts, that anything on television that wasn't a cartoon or a comedy or a Western or a ball game or a thing with doctors or something designed to scare the crap out of me like The Twilight Zone or The Outer Limits, anything but that was necessarily important, often very important. The rest of that day is largely a blank except for dinner. I ate. My parents did not. I have some memory of them putting me to bed impossibly early for a Friday night, with the excuse being that we were going to see the Carls the next day in New Jersey. The Carls were friends of my folks. I think my mother knew her from a bank she had worked at. They lived in Westfield, New Jersey, an hour away, across the George Washington Bridge and everything. And maybe every 3 or 4 weeks or so, Either we would go see them or they would come see us, and our trip had long since been planned. The Carls had 2 boys, one a couple of years older than me, one just slightly younger. I can remember the trip only because one of my joys at the age of 4 and 5 was looking for all the different kinds of cars. And on that Saturday, I was sorely disappointed. There weren't any cars. The roads were deserted. First, my folks didn't eat. Today, they didn't talk. And now there was nobody on the streets or the parkways or the bridge. Something was really wrong. We got to the Carls faster than I could recall ever having done so. Ordinarily, Mr. Carl loved to quiz me about the cars I'd seen, but on that Saturday, in the 23rd, he and his wife simply said a quick hello to me, and then their boys and I were rushed into their room, and for all I know, they locked us in. I last saw these 2 guys around 1969. Their dad was in the petroleum industry, and they had lived in Venezuela, and I think they went back there, so forgive me, I don't remember their names. But as soon as Mrs. Carl slammed their door shut, the older one said to me, "All right, what's wrong with the grown-ups? Why are they all crying?" I remember telling them that Kennedy had been shot, and I thought Kennedy was the president, and the older one gulped and asked, "Shot with a gun?" We put on their ancient black and white TV and went looking for something to watch, and there was nothing on except men sitting at desks looking ashen, even on the black and white TVs of 1963. But I'm confident we did not realize that they were talking about Kennedy and the assassination. We just knew they were not supposed to be there on our TVs. Saturday morning belonged to kids. On a Saturday morning, the only 2 of the 7 New York television stations would not ordinarily be wall-to-wall with cartoons until 11 a.m. or noon or later. One was the educational station, Channel 13. The other was Channel 5, and they had a kids' show with a live studio audience full of kids and games and clowns and whatever. On the others, we could rely on Quick Draw McGraw and Bugs and the like, but on this Saturday morning, they were playing what sounded like church music, and the only thing they displayed was their channel number and the call letters of the station. "Maybe they ran out of cartoons," said the younger of the Carl brothers. Even at age 4, I understood television better than I did assassinations. "They don't run out," I said. "They just play the same ones over and over again. Haven't you noticed?" It amazed me that he hadn't noticed. And it was at this point that I began to really worry about what was happening. Any time one of us left the brothers' room to use the bathroom, the adults would stop talking. They were stopping in mid-word. Meanwhile, the 3 of us kids had played every board game the brothers had, and the older of them asked their parents to let us go outside and play, and he came back shaken because they had said no. They always want us out of the house. What's wrong? On the way home to Hastings, and I think we had been there long enough that it was getting dark already, my parents finally filled me in. At some point later, before I went to college, I remember asking my mother what she told me and when, and she said they had waited until the second day because they believed there was a chance Kennedy had been killed by the Russians and that there would be a war. And remember, we had almost had a war, almost a nuclear war, 13 months earlier. That I have no memory of. I guessed that it was easier to tell me in the car because they didn't have to hide their faces from me, so I would not see if they were crying. My mother did say she was amazed that I had figured out what had happened and that it had shocked all the adults without really understanding what any of it meant. She thought by Saturday evening it was pretty clear the Russians had not killed President Kennedy, and as bad as it was not going to get worse, so they might as well tell me what I could understand, and they decided it was safe enough to let me go outside and play again. This, my mom was pretty confident, meant that I was sitting there with them on Sunday the 24th, probably over lunch, when Lee Harvey Oswald was himself assassinated on live television. I think she's right. I recall them changing the channel away from CBS, which they rarely did, for once, because they had just started to run some sort of report from Roger Mudd. My folks could not abide Roger Mudd. No offense, they just couldn't. Only ABC and NBC showed the murder of Oswald live. I'd love to recount my reaction, or my folks, I can't remember it. I also have no idea what happened in school that following short week. It was Thanksgiving coming up, and for all I know, they canceled the 3 days' worth of classes. I do remember that as the shock of the assassination wore off, my father was angry about something comparatively trivial. He had, for the first time in his life, as a native New Yorker, gotten actual reserved bleacher seats for the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. 34 years he had waited for this. But now it was obvious that there were only two choices. Either they would cancel the parade outright or they would make it the briefest, grimmest parade in New York City history. They chose the latter. My memory is that my dad took me, but my mom stayed home. Our location was at Broadway and around 50th Street, and I asked my dad what all the black stuff was on a couple of the buildings. It was mourning crepe. Some of the buildings were adorned with black mourning crepe, as if we were there for Kennedy's funeral procession, not the ceremonial first seasonal appearance of Santa Claus. At one point, a group marched by with a huge American flag wrapped in mourning crepe, bigger than the flags themselves. A year ago, I found the box of slides that my dad, an inveterate photographer, took of that parade. It is amazing that the sense of shock and of people pretending to be happy to be at a parade is either retained by the images from that November 28th, or it sparks my own emotional memories of the weird, disturbing experience. There were the traditional Thanksgiving balloons. By the time Donald Duck got to us, he was losing air rapidly. He'd gotten punctured somehow, if you want a metaphor, for November 1963. There were bands, there was Santa, and it was warm. It was 60 degrees. Coats were open, hats were off. But more than anything else, it was almost silent. You could hear kids throughout, the younger the louder. But you could hear them from the other side of the parade. It was as if you went to a ball game and the public address system didn't work. It's actually quite a relief for the first few minutes. I am convinced I could hear the shoes of the band members hit the pavement as they walked past me. There is only one other thing from my childhood about the Kennedy assassination that I remember carrying the kind of shock like those first few days of observing all the disoriented and, as my friend in Jersey noted, crying adults. In 1970, might have been 1971, but I'm pretty sure it was 1970 when I was in the 8th grade, all of our classes were canceled late one morning, and we were gathered in the school chapel for a special assembly. We had a lot of assemblies there, but never as late as 11 a.m. Some guy came in, and I have thought and asked and researched and have figured out nothing about who he was. But he had a copy of something almost none of us, and by us I mean Americans of 1970, had ever seen before. It had been on television, local television, a couple of times, but it would not be shown on national television in whole for another 5 years. The speaker called it the Zapruder film. And as much other assorted film from that day as any JFK documentary I saw before I was an adult, he showed that too. And while I do not remember him espousing any of the conspiracy theories that by then had become a constant in our country, that might be because he showed us the Zapruder film the way Kevin Costner showed it in the Oliver Stone film JFK. We must have seen the fatal shots 20 times. At every speed slower than real time. I think we were all ordered back into our respective history classes, where shocked students listened to even more shocked teachers. And we asked the same questions that Carls and I did on November 23rd, 1963. What's wrong with the grown-ups? I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. Countdown has come to you from the Vin Scully Studios at the Olbermann Broadcasting Empire World Headquarters in New York. Countdown musical directors Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel arranged, produced, and performed most of our music. Mr. Chanel handled orchestration and keyboards. Mr. Ray was on guitars, bass, and drums. Produced by TKO Brothers. Other music, including other Beethoven tunage, arranged and performed by No Horns Allowed. The sports music is courtesy of ESPN Inc. It was written by Mitch Warren Davis. We call it the Olbermann theme from ESPN2. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by Nancy Faust, the best baseball stadium organist ever. Our announcer today was my friend Howard Feynman, and everything else was pretty much my fault. So that's countdown for this, the 1050th day since Dementia J. Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Convict him now while we still can. The next scheduled countdown is Tuesday. Bulletins as the news warrants. Till then, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, good luck, and happy Thanksgiving.